Hello and welcome back to One Trick Mind with me, Raptor.
And me, Michael.
And today we thought we would do a bit of a video looking at what our crew would be if we could pick from any of the crew from Star Trek, what individuals we would put in different positions for our ship. Just so folks are clear on the rules, for our first officer, we've allowed ourselves to pick from any captain and any first officer from any of the shows, but then the rest are pretty normal, and we've given ourselves the option of one additional sort of extra crew member that doesn't necessarily fit any of the categories for standard bridge officers or standard positions. So we're going to be picking our first officer, our tactical officer or chief of security, our operations officer, our helms officer, our chief engineer, our chief medical, and then one extra. And we're going to start with our first officer, and Michael, I will let you go first.
All right, well, I couldn't bring myself to demote any of the captains to first officer, so I ended up not going that route, and I've gone for Commander Saru.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
I think he would complement my leadership style very well. I tend to be a little bit reactive, slightly on the hot-headed side, so I think Commander Saru would be a good counter to that. Is very tactically smart, very cautious, very careful, has proven to be quite useful in almost any scenario that you put him in. And again, I feel like my hand would be on the big red button constantly, like ready to deal with bad situations, and he would be the person to kind of rein me back in and be like, whoa. We have other options here. Let's perhaps take a diplomatic approach. I think he would be very good at keeping me in check. So ultimately, that's who I went for on my first officer.
Interesting. I have demoted one of the captains for my first officer.
They're not going to like you very much for doing that to them.
I've gone with Pike as my first officer.
Oh, okay.
I wanted someone, again, like you, with a very different personality to mine, perhaps a bit more cool-headed, a bit more someone who obviously sort of plans and is very careful and deliberate with his actions, but also someone that has quite an obvious sort of stabilizing influence on the crew. Pike in Strange New World, this is Strange New World's Pike, obviously. He's obviously really comfortable with being around his crew in a not on the job time, like he has all those dinner parties and stuff. So he seems like the sort of individual that will just be quite good to have for the bridge crew in general. He's also obviously very intelligent, very diplomatic, but he's also not scared to get stuck in, and he clearly has a lot of wisdom with his older age, so that's why I picked him.
Not that old. He's only in like his 40s.
He won out over Picard and T'Pol. Those were the other two I was considering.
T'Pol was probably a close second for me. I was very close to picking T'Pol. And I just realized I said I wouldn't demote any of the captains, and Saru was a captain, so I guess I did kind of demote him down to first officer, but hey.
Dastardly individual. You can pick the next position.
I'm just going to go down the list as how we wrote it here. So, tactical security officer. Okay. I went for Lieutenant Tuvok.
So have I.
I knew we'd have to have at least one on here that we picked the same one for. I think he's just one of the most cool-headed of the security officers presented. Him being very, very, I wouldn't say cautious, but again, just very level-headed and logical about every decision he makes, I think makes for a very good security officer. You don't want a trigger-happy security officer like Malcolm Reed, in my opinion. Like, I think he's probably bottom of the list for me in terms of, like, tactical officers.
Yeah, I think so, too.
I would very much prefer to have someone like Tuvok who will analyze the situation and determine where force is needed versus where a more complex approach is needed. I also just happen to like Tuvok a lot. I think he's very funny and like overall a quality guy. So I would love to have him as my tactical officer.
Yeah, I went with him because of his logical mindset, which is very useful for the role. He is physiological advantages, being Vulcan. He demonstrates some very interesting tactical thinking on Voyager. The fact that he is respected by the crew of Voyager, if not liked, as a friend. There is that scene between Chakotay and Tuvok when Janeway sort of slips into depression, where it's clear that Chakotay doesn't like him, but he respects his opinions, which is, I think, quite important.
He's liked a little too much by Neelix.
I had Worf here originally, and T'Pol as first officer, but I decided to change my first officer and give myself a Vulcan for tactical officer instead.
Gotta have at least one Vulcan and like a major role on your ship.
Plus the fact that something happened to the Enterprise E with Worf in charge, which we don't know what it was yet.
Yeah. Don't know if we can fully trust his command style.
No.
And he's a little bit too much of a hothead for tactical officer, in my opinion. Like, he made for a good one, but ultimately he's not who I would pick. I would also feel bad telling him no all the time.
So, operations officer, I went with Data.
I did too.
Because literally there is no reason to have any other operations officer. Like, next to Data, Harry Kim is not, it's not a question. Like,
I mean, he's more advanced.
Data's the most overpowered Deus Ex Machina character you could have on your starship, so it has to be Data, fundamentally from an efficiency point.
That's exactly why I picked him as well. I mean, not the only reason though. I think he's a lovely person. Like, I love Data. I would love having him around. But yeah, just efficiency wise, like, there is no one better than Data at that particular position. Almost any position you could ask him to be in. So if you want the ship to operate well, I would pick him.
Can you imagine him, Tuvok, and Pike in a at a dinner party together?
Or him, Tuvok, and Saru.
That would be very interesting.
I would love that.
Helm?
This one might surprise you. It surprised me a little bit the more I thought about it. I went for Ensign LaForge, Geordie's daughter.
Oh, Geordie's daughter. Okay, I am surprised. I think mine's going to surprise you as well, but go on.
I found her to be one of the better characters in Season 3 of Picard. I think she's very professional for being as young as she is, while still being like fun. She has a personality to her. And in that show in particular, she proved to be a very capable pilot, which, again, I want that on my side. Not to mention, she has some genuine engineering skills that she's picked up from her dad. So she has the potential to be, multifaceted in the role. I just think she would make for a great addition to the crew. I almost picked Erica Ortegas from Strange New Worlds because I really like her as well.
Interesting.
But end of the day, I'm going to go with Ensign LaForge. I think she is a very capable helmsman.
Well, I've gone with an option that perhaps you might not have thought about, and that is Jazdia Dax.
That is not what I thought about.
She's the helmsman for the Defiant.
That's
pretty much throughout the show of DS9. And obviously, her true nature makes her the perfect officer. She comes with a huge amount of experience, a huge amount of knowledge, but she's also demonstrably perfect with diplomacy, her knowledge of important figures. She revels in all sorts of alien cultures, which would be great for first contact missions. And she's skilled in combat, thanks to being previously Curzon Dax. And the Klingon trainings.
And she's a lot of fun at parties.
And a lot of fun at parties. So she would make a great helmsman. And didn't really have any other thoughts about who else. Like, all the other helmsmen, not up to that level.
Yeah, I also just can't stand Paris, so I took him off my list real fast. I was like, get out of here. You're annoying. I'm sure some people would take offense to that, but I just do not like Tom Paris.
I mean, I would put Sulu above Paris easily.
Sulu was in the running for mine. He's definitely got a lot of experience, proven to be a good leader, but I wanted to give some young blood some love in this as well.
Chief Engineer?
This one also might be a surprise to you. I went for Commander Pelia from Strange New Worlds.
I almost went with her. The only reason I didn't was because we haven't really seen enough of her yet for me to gauge it, but she was strong up there for me.
In my opinion, she's thousands of years old. She comes sort of like Dax, comes with a plethora of experience and knowledge. She's proven to be an effective camp counselor, an effective ship counselor with many of the crew. even if that's not her official role. And in a pinch, seems to be quite handy as an engineer, even if that's one of her more relatively new skills that she's picked up along the way, as we saw in the time travel episode of that show. I mean, she's the one who taught Scotty how to be an engineer and everything, so I think she would make for a fantastic chief engineer and great in conversation.
I went with Chief O'Brien, circa DS9.
You can't go wrong with O'Brien.
Firstly, the Klingons considered him a combat veteran and an expert in starship combat. Can you have any higher praise from a Klingon than that? He was able to get Cardassian and Starfleet technology on DS9 to work with each other. He fixed the problems with the Defiant. He was in charge of an entire space station, which has got to be a more complicated, difficult role than just a starship. And has clear abilities beyond his engineering, his transporter knowledge, his infiltration and espionage missions, his previous military career, and demonstrates plenty of leadership abilities, even giving Worf advice on leadership in DS9. For me, that's pretty important.
And I completely agree. Again, as I said, you cannot go wrong with O'Brien. Like, he is an outstanding officer who would make for an excellent chief engineer, and did make for an excellent chief engineer.
Chief medical officer. This one was so hard.
I suspect we're going to have the same one.
Go on.
I chose Dr. Phlox.
Yep. I ummed and ahed between Phlox and the Doctor from Voyager, but Phlox won out in the end.
I mean, I love Phlox. I love that a lot of his medical techniques are involved with utilizing various organisms and animals, going for like a more naturalistic approach to medicine while still being like way ahead of the curve compared to a lot of other doctors. His bedside manner is fantastic, which I cannot say the same for the Doctor or for a lot of other
I literally
doctors.
have that written down.
In general, I think he makes for an interesting person. Like, his personality, his wives, his whole cultural background is very interesting. I really like the guy. He's made some of the better arguments, like for and against, like the Prime Directive in certain cases in Enterprise, which I really enjoyed. I think he would make for, a fantastic chief medical officer.
Yep, so for me, again, it was very similar to you. The fact he's so cheerful but also capable of seriousness. He has a very unique approach to medicine compared with any of the other Starfleet doctors, finding cures in unusual places. Has some very unique physiology thanks to his alien nature. He's apart from Lower Deck, he's the only other alien doctor in Star Trek.
That's true, unless I guess you could sort of count the Doctor in that, given that he's a hologram, technically like a different species.
But the fact he is a different species, has those hibernation cycles and such, gives him some unique physiology that might come in handy. And I literally had this written down, and I will quote it. While the EMH is probably more capable, Phlox has the better bedside manner.
Yeah, and even though some people say bedside manner does not matter in the medical field, I completely disagree with that.
I think it does. Phlox serves not just as a doctor, but clearly a sort of counselor role in Enterprise. Consoles Archer during some of the worst parts of the Xindi crisis. Consoles T'Pol with her Benar syndrome. Like, he's not just a doctor, he's clearly a sort of confident role as well, which I think is very important.
And I mean, there are even studies kind of proven that your mental state highly affects your physical state of your body. And having the doctor like berate you while you're potentially dying is probably not the best case scenario. I would rather have Phlox, who could sort of ease my mind a little bit as well as perform any life-saving care.
So, our additional officer, just to explain to folks, so this, we were like, any officer or role that didn't really fit, crew that didn't really fit to one particular role, because there are so many of them in Star Trek. We thought we needed to have that sort of extra person on our ship, and I think this is where we might vary the most. So,
oh, we're gonna vary here. I'm about to set the comments on fire.
What did you go with?
I have gone for a xenoanthropologist specialist role. So a study of alien cultures and their various physiological aspects and everything like that, so that you know exactly what you're dealing with.
Who have you put in that?
This is where I'm gonna set the comments on fire. Commander Burnham.
Oh, because of the tardigrade.
Not because of the tardigrade specifically, but it is specified in the show that she is a very experienced and well-read scientist officer. Like, she definitely knows what she's talking about whenever basically the plot demanded it. So I've decided to make use of that instead, have her be like the go-to officer on the ship for, hey, we've come across this new species or a species that we haven't dealt with on the regular. How would you recommend we approach them? And have her have that very specialized role in the cultures of other alien species.
Just going to overlook the assaulting her superior officer thing.
I'm going to go ahead and say that didn't happen. If she was on my ship as a xenoanthropologist, she wouldn't have been in the position to commit mutiny. So
I think it's an interesting position to have, and there's a lot of possible crew you could actually put in there. I think 7 of 9 would do quite well in that position, given all her Borg knowledge. Saru probably could have also done that.
I'd be worried about 7 of the 9 constantly not knowing how to deal with people well enough in that role. Commander Burnham was very, very good with people specifically.
Eventually.
Everyone says like, oh, she cries too much. I'm like, well, that would make for a very empathetic person to take on this xenoanthropologist role. I'm one of the few people out there who actually does like Michael Burnham. I don't like the way they wrote that show, but I think as a character, she has very many interesting facets that I think would suit this role quite well.
Including being a mutinous little traitor. Anyway, so for my extra role, I went for a dedicated communications officer.
Which I think is very important.
Even with the universal translator being as good as it was by Picard's time, various episodes of The Next Generation demonstrated that sometimes you don't need someone who can understand the sort of the words, you need someone who can understand communication more. The Tellarians? I think it's the Tellarians. There's so many T races in Next Gen.
I was going to say, who knows if that's actually what it is.
The Tellarians are a key example of that with their metaphor-driven language. And no one on the crew of the Enterprise could figure it out for a long time. I would have, in that position, Uhura.
I think that's a very solid choice. She's proven to be one of the best communications officers ever seen in Star Trek.
If we take both her depictions in Strange New Worlds, but also the original series and the movies into account, she's clearly incredibly skilled at languages, perhaps even more so than Hoshi ever was. But more than that, equally capable of leadership roles and capabilities and thinking her way out of a problem. And I just think she's the perfect one for the job. Like, out of any of the possible crew I could put in there, I think she would do it really well. And like I say, I think it's really important to have that on the bridge of your starship.
I 100% agree. I was very torn on whether I was going to do a specialist role or a communications officer, because in a perfect world, I would have just added both of those roles and had my xenoanthropologist and a communications officer, because I do agree having a communications officer is, I think, very vital, and a little frustrating that most Star Trek shows seem to have forgone that role altogether since passing the 23rd century. Because, I mean, there are multiple scenarios where your universal translator can only take you so far, and specifically when encountering new races where there's no grounds to actually create a language just out of thin air, you kind of need a specialist who is completely honed in on communication. So I completely agree with you there.
I do have one question for you, and this was something I was zooming and ahhing with as I was making my list, is would any of these picks change depending on the era of which we were? Because I think, say if we were during the Dominion War, I think Pike would go and be replaced with Janeway. I think maybe Chief O'Brien would go and be replaced with B'Elanna Torres. I think Phlox would go and definitely be replaced by the EMH. Would any of your crew change based on perhaps a specific Star Trek era or situation?
I would probably change my helmsman from LaForge probably to Ortega's, because even in Strange New Worlds, they've explained that she is a combat veteran. She's actually piloted during the Klingon War, so she has a little bit of experience in wartime. I would probably also change Dr. Phlox to Bashir if I were to change it, because, I mean, he has a lot of experience in the Dominion War as a wartime medical officer, and being genetically modified, I feel like would be very, very handy in that kind of situation. Everyone else I probably would keep. Again, I would still want Saru to kind of rein in my more impulsive reactions. I would still want Tuvok. I would still want Data, and I would probably still want Commander Pelia as my chief engineer. There hasn't been enough to explain whether she's been through any wartime scenarios, but being almost 2,000 years old, I would imagine she has to have experienced something like that in her lifetime. And we know Burnham can get down, so I'm like, I feel pretty...
If not too much. Her and flipping Malcolm Reed from Enterprise, they would be always at the table together, sharing flipping stories of how they went barging into situations, opening fire before anyone could think of anything else.
And that's why I'm putting Burnham as my xenoanthropologist, because I'm putting her far away from the combat, unless I tell her to.
I did almost have Shax as my tactical officer at one point, because I felt I wanted to try to represent as much of Star Trek as possible. The problem with the lower decks crews is that they are so excessively hyped up to fulfill their character role in a comedy show that I found it very difficult. Shax, I thought, like, I just can't imagine him being a tactical officer I would trust, since he always wants to blow up the warp core.
I mean, yeah, he would feed off of my worst impulses. I'd be like, blow them up, and he'd be like, yes! So I probably wouldn't have Shax as well.
I am surprised that there's a few crew that I would have thought would have been here that aren't. 7 of 9, obviously. Odo, Kira as well.
Yeah.
Those three. I'm surprised neither of us sort of thought about. I almost had a Wushikun in here, because apparently she's operations officer for Discovery. Wouldn't have known, because they never fucking mention it in the show. But she's the operations officer.
She's in the right section of the bridge for that to be the case, so I guess it's...
You could tell with a ghastly holographic imperial marble floored...
Yeah, I mean... It's like Mitchell on Strange New Worlds. It's a very not explored character thus far, but she is their operations officer as well. And the only way you can really tell is that she's at that console. So you're like, okay, well, I guess.
Yeah, and we just didn't see enough character development for a lot of Discovery's crew for me to really consider any of them seriously on the list.
And I've got 2 of them on my list.
Yeah.
The only 2 that got a lot of development.
The only 2 that got a lot of development, to be fair. So yeah, but I think we had some interesting lists, even if we did have a few that were pretty similar.
I was gonna say, we had 3 that were the same, 4 that were different.
Of course, you've forgotten the most important crew member, Porthos, which you would always...
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%. That's my real first officer, but...
You'd have him sat there next to you on the bridge.
I would. He wants to see what's going on. Why wouldn't you have him up there?
Even a Romulan would be softened by Porthos doing his puppy dog eyes over the view screen.
Exactly. That would be my key diplomatic negotiation tactic. I'd be like, have you seen my dog?
That was one of the reasons I considered having T'Pol as first officer.
No, because she hates him?
No, because she looks visually appealing, and I thought...
There are some tactical reasons to have that.
Thinking about how you look when you come up on the view screen of your alien ship, there is something to be said about making sure that the fellow or woman next to you either has the authority, sort of aura of authority, or perhaps the aura of being quite sexually appealing. Which, let's be fair, was her point of the show. It was her purpose in the fucking Enterprise show anyway.
I mean, it was the purpose of 7 of 9 originally as well. And I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people that would find Saru very handsome and attractive. I'm sure there's some who are like, oh, he's an alien, but you're dealing with more alien races than you are humans in space. So I'm just saying. But yeah, at the end of the day, I like my crew. I feel like I would be very comfortable with my array of people I've put into leadership positions.
I agree. I think I would be quite comfortable, and I could see this band of crew having some crazy episodes. Chief O'Brien, Phlox and Dax. Can you imagine Phlox and Dax? They would be, because they're so similar in personalities. Like, they're so overly cheerful about every culture and shit. And they like food as well.
I mean, I would love to see Tuvok and Data just go back and forth, like, both highly logical and not very understanding of like sarcasm or humor, just being like the ultimate comedy duo and being very effective at their jobs as well.
With poor old Pike just like constantly wondering what level of hell he's in, having to deal with all of this.
And then Porthos at my side, just enjoying it all.
Well, let us know down in the comments which crew you think is best. Let's make it a little bit of a competition. And let us know what your crews would be for some of these positions in the comments down below. We do love to read comments, even really long ones. We got some really, really long ones on our last video, which required reading through, which I really liked. Some really interesting ideas in there.
I say the whole point of that previous video was to get a conversation going about what other people's ideas for Discovery would have been. So I was really happy to see some very long, thought out responses to it.
Yeah, and not just, I just wouldn't make it because it's shit, which I did expect, but we didn't get anything like that. So thank you, folks, for that. But yeah, let us know in the comments what you think. Don't forget to give the video a like if you haven't done so already, and subscribe if you're new to the channel for more Star Trek related episodes this year. But until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.